discussion about Belegar Ironhammer in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Out of the campaigns that have to deal with Caracade Peaks or are incentivized to tackle Caracade Peaks, Belegar's campaign is the one where Caracade Peaks is the most important thing to acquire in your campaign as quickly as you could manage for the benefits it provides. On the flip side, unlike Skarsnik and Queek, Belegar has actually the worst time to acquire 8 peaks, purely because of the distance involved as well as his starting position. So let's take in consideration what Belegar has to contend with respect to Caracade Peaks. The first and foremost thing to consider in your campaign if you're looking to play Belegar are his faction effects, specifically that plus 50% upkeep that you have to deal with until Caracade Peaks is recaptured. That is a very substantial downside to contend with in a campaign, because it means, even very early on in the campaign, you will end up bankrupt pretty quickly, or you will end up being close to bankruptcy very, very quickly as well. So for instance, over here it's turn 13, and I'm effectively running out of money after just getting an army and a half. That is not the norm within the context of Warhammer 3 campaigns. In fact, it is quite unusual to end up in that kind of situation. But because of that plus 50% upkeep Belegar has to deal with, it is a problem. But on top of that, if we say, for instance, if I go to Caracade Peaks and I use the console command to confederate it, to get the O fulfilled situation and just disband this army. If we look at the Caracade Peaks situation over here, what you're going to get in terms of benefits are so ridiculously substantial that it far surpasses, from my point of view, what both Skarsnik and Queek have. You gain 100 experience per turn for all your armies. You get plus 5 Lord Recruit rank. You get plus 4 control in all provinces and a 10 leadership benefit against greenskins. That leadership benefit effectively means that pretty much any dwarf unit you recruit is going to be damn near unbreakable when fighting greenskins, because dwarves already have pretty good leadership. You add a 10 leadership benefit against greenskins, that ends up being pretty ridiculous. Furthermore, if we look at 8 Peaks itself, the actual tangible benefits of the Ancestor's Tomb, so spending all the money and effort and time to develop 8 Peaks, it gives you 10 control in adjacent provinces, but crucially, recruit rank for infantry units and magical attacks for all units. The actual benefit that you get from developing Caracade Peaks is not really worth it past tier 3, and that's from a structure every dwarf gets. That's the Grand Underway Junction. The actual benefit you get from 8 Peaks as a settlement is not really worth it. The benefit of the O fulfilled, however, is crazy, because you suddenly, once you gain Caracade Peaks, you suddenly switch from paying 50% extra for your troops, which goes, for instance, in this case, it was like over 3,000 income difference. Granted, that's also the settlement, gaining the settlement, but roughly 3,000, because we did get 484 from 8 Peaks itself. You go from an economic negative to an economic positive, and now suddenly all your armies are just ridiculously better. Inherently so. That's an issue, and I think that is not the best design of a campaign. That's just the problem of 8 Peaks, but that's not all that Belegar has to deal with, unfortunately. For what it is worth, you do have the goat pastures available in Caracade Peak, so you can grow it as a settlement faster than many other settlements, but on the downside of it, 8 Peaks is in a province with only 2 settlements, so the actual growth it can get is lower as a result of it. This is a bit of an issue. So technically it's faster, practically is slower. bit annoying on that respect. From my point of view, I do think that this is the one dwarf campaign that Creative Assembly should really look at. I feel like the O fulfilled benefit should be the one attached to the structure, and the actual benefit over here that you get from the Reinforced Citadel should be the O fulfilled benefit. At least the magical attacks aspect. Really. Some combination of it. That would be my perspective, because it is a ridiculous jump in power. And even if you rush Karakate Peaks, you're going to lose a lot to rush Karakate Peaks, to be sure. So it's not really worth rushing it. But it creates this kind of dynamic in a campaign where the actual meaty part of the campaign, the one that matters, is pretty bothersome to tackle. But then you just have won the campaign to such a ridiculous degree after that, that's pretty much not worth playing. And that is quite a shame, because I think Belegar does have the opportunity to have a really fun and interesting campaign in a lot of ways, but not the way it currently works. This is a case where I think the old world worked better, where you started conquering Karakate Peaks was not just about the one settlement, it was multiple settlements, you had a long fight, and you gradually lost that upkeep downside. And then once you gain control of it, and more critical portions of it, and you got to fulfilled. But you had to work for it. And it was just like, oh, just do one thing and that's it. Now, beyond that, faction effect-wise, it's pretty weak. You do get 10 leadership when laying siege, but because of the aspect of sieging, the way sieges work, when you're actually assaulting a settlement, you're not really going to need a leadership benefit when encircling a settlement. Vanguard deployment in underrated battles is very situational. As for the extra High King Decree, which gives you access to deeps, that sounds great, and it can be sometimes. But in reality, when you're dealing with the deeps, you have one particular research that you should always get in every Dwarven campaign fairly quickly, which is the High King Authority. And this gives you that construction time, -1 construction time for provincial capitals, so it's very worth investing. Even if you're not willing to rush all the way to Grand Throne Chamber and construction guilds, which personally I think it is worth it, I think getting the High King Authority and Rat Poison before anything else, like let's say you want to focus on the clans, I think it's worth investing in this as opposed to going into the clans. That's my perspective. So you will always have that High King Decree, so it means that extra High King Decree is not really as important. The Ancestor heroes, however, absolutely do grant you a substantial advantage. Because it means that while your starring army, and I did lose the initial hammers, while your starring army is not really great, Rangers, Hammers, some of the War Warriors, not really a great thing, but your starring army are these 4 heroes. And what's really important about these guys is not just the fact that they don't cost upkeep, so they do help you with the financial situation a bit. They're unbreakable, which not necessarily great in a lot of situations, but does mean that these guys will fight until the bitter end. But what is important from my point of view is that each of them gives you a 1 hero capacity for that hero type. So it's not affecting your ability to recruit heroes of that type. So you can have Thanes, you can have Engineers, you can have Runesmiths. 1 extra on top of the 4 you already start with. So you can make a really powerful hero squad relatively quickly as Belegar. That is a pretty tangible benefit in his campaign. Furthermore, if we look at his Lord effects and his special skill line, this is where Belegar shines. His faction effects are not great, but his Lord effects are absolutely crazy. So you get True King of Karakate Peaks. This gives you missile block chance for your entire army. Doesn't matter what unit it is. It can be things like Iron Drakes, it can be things like Quarrelers with Grey Weapons, it can be Rangers, it can be Heroes. They all get that missile block chance. So that means you get a bronze shield, or if the unit already has a bronze shield, it becomes a silver shield. That is absurdly strong. Though not necessarily against Greenskins or Skaven, though obviously both of them have range units, but more so against Wood Elves. That is a rather pertinent point with regards to Belegar, because Belegar, you might think his campaign is really focused about beating up the Skaven and Greenskins, But his campaign is really focused about annihilating the Wood Elves. But let's focus onward a bit here. You get diplomatic relations with dwarves. You get global recruitment benefit, global recruitment capacity. One of the reasons, by the way, you may not actually want to bother going for Caracate Peaks is one of the things you can do in Belegar's campaign is just hurry up and wait. I'm not exaggerating on this. See, his quest battles will give you vision of Karak-Azul. And once you've waited enough with Karak-Azul, especially because of that diplomatic benefit you have, you might just be able to get vision with them, get some non-aggression pacts, and because Queek and Tretch wipe out Karak-Azul fairly regularly, you might just be able to confederate them from a distance without ever having to step foot in the Battlelands. So there's no value, really, in sending your army over there when you can get potentially a full stack from Karak-Azul. And even if you don't, you might just be able to recruit an army quickly enough over here to take Caracate Peaks. Due to the nature of sieges, an attacker has an inherent advantage due to the AI decisions, the static AI, etc. It's very hard to lose an offensive siege. Pretty much. At worst, you get into a draw situation, or a situation where you can't just take it over. But that's kind of the thing. You're not really racing with Belegar to take Caracate Peaks. You're just trying to play the game in such a way. Like, you do his quest battles, he has 2 of them. You get his items, which are pretty solid, and then you might just get that confederation with Karak-Azul. It's a bit of a weird mix of a campaign as far as I see it. And then on top of that, beyond Rally the Holds, that global recruitment duration benefit and global recruitment capacity means that you can recruit units distantly faster than most other factions. This is what makes Belegar such a fantastic choice to confederate if you're playing other Dwarf Legendary Lords. Like, if you're playing any other Dwarf Legendary Lords, your 2 best choices are Grumbrindle and Belegar. Usually you want to go for Grumbrindle, because Malekith usually wipes him out, so if you can hold that territory over there, it can be a benefit. But and Grumbrindle's blue skill line is ridiculous. But this kind of special skill line that Belegar has is pretty crazy. Then you also get local recruitment capacity, recruit rank, Oath Gold, pretty solid, Ancestral Guidance, so you can recruit Thanes in all provinces, and gives you +2 hero capacity for Thanes. So you're not just looking at maintaining 3 Thanes over here in Belegar's campaign. No, you're looking at maintaining 5. Pretty early on as well in a Belegar campaign. And then you have Age of Reconquest. This is a genuinely insane benefit. You get 10% campaign movement range, 30% construction cost for province capitals and settlement buildings faction-wide, and you actually get a really good siege benefit as the attacker with the Shattering Aura, which reduces enemy leadership in a siege. One of the issues to tackle when in a siege is the defender has a significant leadership benefit, but reducing that leadership by 12 is a pretty big deal. It counteracts the effect that the defender has inherently in a siege. So Belegar as a lord, from the perspective of Lord Effect Special Skill Line, is amazing. But due to the dynamic of Caracate Peaks and his faction effects, his faction is not really worth playing. Another thing that plays a part in all of this, and one of the reasons I don't think his campaign is worth playing, regardless of the oath-fulfilled benefits, the issue with his campaign is the reason you may not want to play this campaign as opposed to confederating him, is that when you do play other Dwarf Legendary Lords, Belegar is the most reliable Legendary Lord of Dwarves in terms of survivability. Forik has a pretty good survivability as well, but Belegar, you rarely, if ever, see him wiped out in a campaign on any difficulty. Sometimes it does happen, but out of 100 campaigns, if it happens once or twice, even that can be pretty rare. I've seen it happen, but every time it's happened, it's a very longer campaign, and you probably are going to be able to comfortably confederate them. Things are always changing because of various AI changes that Creative Assembly is implementing and patches, etc. But I'm talking about how things have gone so far. So that's one thing to mention about his campaign and the campaign dynamic he has to deal with. Whereas if you're playing Belegar, there's pretty high chances that Thorgrim gets wiped out. There's chances Grombrindal gets wiped out. Malachi gets wiped out. Hell, even Ungrim gets wiped out. Occasionally. Not as often as, say, Thorgrim or Grombrindal, but it does happen sometimes. So that is a reason why you shouldn't want to play this campaign. On top of that, one of the reasons you don't want to rush for Carrick 8 Peaks actually has to do with Carrick Azor, which starts under Greenskin's control. Well, you can also get Carrick Hearn for a Confederation, though you may not want to rush this, because you might want to wait to let AI spend its money and resources on building up this province as opposed to you having to do it. Because Carrick Hearn starts with very little, but due to AI cheats, the AI can give you 2 stacks. For instance, over here I did get some troops, but I also got 2 full stacks pretty much from Carrick Hearn by the time I confederated them. But you do have the Copper Mountain benefit from Carrick Azor. This further adds to the substantial benefit of global recruitment that Belegar does work with, and gives you a really good growth benefit. This is actually worth more than Carrick 8, the special landmark in Carrick 8 Peaks by quite a bit. Sure, the underweight junction is always there, but it is worth pointing it out that in terms of the unique building that Belegar gets versus Copper Mountain, I personally would take Copper Mountain any single day. That is my view on the matter. On top of that, his campaign dynamic that he's dealing with is, well, suffice to say, is awkward, to say the least. See, with the Dwarf rework, Creative Assembly added the Legendary Grudges. These are objectives that you want to complete because they give you various benefits. Well, one of the very significant Legendary Grudges that you can do as Belegar, keeping in mind what I said, that Belegar is really good against Wood Elves. The reason he's so good against Wood Elves is beyond the missile block chance. Well, really, the missile block chance is the thing that plays a role in it. Wood Elf settlements are actually the only sieges in the game that are actually difficult, of any description. If Creative Assembly ever wants to rework sieges, I would say that the Wood Elf settlements, the way those pan out, are actually the way sieges should work. Because the defender has a genuine advantage there, and you're not necessarily going to have an easy fight. And they don't have any walls. Maybe that's something about those. But it's also the layout of settlements. Because Wood Elves are going to draw into firing lanes, and regardless of where you're advancing, you're going to be hit from other sides. So that is one inherent advantage. This is why that missile block chance is so very significant if you're playing Belegar, because you have that advantage. Also with easy access to Iron Drakes, as well as having Thanes that can also buff said Iron Drakes with Flammable, or Iron Beard rather, you end up having a pretty sizable advantage. When you can make an easy job of dealing with Durfu as Belegar, you know things are really good from that point of view. Actually, you're pretty good at countering not necessarily the factions that are over here in this area. You're actually really good at countering pretty much everyone that's over here. Because Ekeclaw is focused on range combat, Arnessa is focused on range combat. For instance, the Wood Elves, obviously. So Belegar, funnily enough, you may actually want to keep him in this area. But one of the principal reasons, beyond the advantages he has against the Wood Elves, is also what you're going to get if you do defeat the Wood Elves. So if you wipe out Athel Loren, you get 2,500 grudges, which goes a long way towards confederating other legendary lords of the dwarves, and it's rather easy to do it compared to dealing with the entirety of the Badlands. And you also get the very substantial benefit of the lumber camp in the Oak of Ages, on top of the benefit that the Oak of Ages has inherently. So you're really incentivized, if you're playing Belegar, to stick around here and just burn Athel Loren to the ground. I do think that's a bit silly compared to what his campaign should be. Furthermore, we gotta talk about Estalia Tylea, the little corner of hell, the Estalian little corner of hell. See, you could ignore Ekeclaw, Mogr, or Arnessa. Chances are you're gonna end up in a war with all of them if you do so. What I've done, for instance, in this campaign, when you start this campaign, you could rush Skaven Blight. That is a popular strategy Legend of Old War uses it. Personally, I've come to the conclusion that the best strategy, yeah, you could wipe out Claw, but why invest that effort when you can just go deal with Tylea, sell, and then annihilate Aranessa, who won't have the army to defeat you, and then sell that territory to Scrag, who will pay you quite a bit for that. Because ogres can get a lot of money due to the way that they work. So you're heavily incentivized in a Belegar campaign to actually stick around where you are. Heck, even rebuilding Karak Norn might be worth it, or it might just be worth sticking around here to take some of this territory from Durfu, sell it to Karl Franz potentially, or sell it to Elspeth, or both of them, get diplomatic relations with them. There's a lot of things that work out better in your campaign as opposed to the Battleland situation. I don't think this is how Belegar's campaign should work, but it does work if you do so. The downside is that all of this does play out and you can get really powerful armies. The downside is you're kind of playing this entire campaign with a rope around your neck. It's not so much difficult playing with plus 50% upkeep, it's just the fact that you have to engage in economic bullshit in order to keep your campaign going without running out of money. So selling territory, fighting ridiculous battles just for money, not because you need to, those kind of things. I don't think that's a really great campaign dynamic. It does work for what it is worth, but I do think it is ridiculous. I think Creative Assembly would be better served moving Belegar closer to Karak Peaks. I would also like to note that one of the reasons you actually want to focus on Athel Loren is that Durfu, when he wipes out Karak Norn, with whom he starts at war with, he gets well over 1,000 grudges for his main army at the very least. Getting 1,000 grudges means that if you do defeat Durfu, sure, you could do the quest battles, you can fight other foes, and you can still accomplish your initial Age of Reckoning, but consider this, my current Age of Reckoning, the first one I had in this campaign, required me to finish 1,700 grudges. I did it through a combination of quest battles and other foes, Ironess and all that, but if you can get 1,000 by just defeating Durfu, why wouldn't you just go defeat Durfu? He's right there, let them wipe out Karak Norn, and then go obliterate them. There's multiple ways of playing it, like you can rush for Tylea, or you can rush for the Greenskins and not confederate Karak Norn, or confederate them, go beat up Durfu, gain his shit, get those grudges, take the Oak of Ages, take everything, and then deal with Aranessa and Ekeclaw, if you will. If you even want to deal with Ekeclaw in a campaign like this. So it's just worth pointing that out. The campaign does work from a perspective that, yeah, I don't think this is, like, some people have described this campaign as being one of the more difficult campaigns in the game. I don't really see it like that. I see it as probably the most frustrating campaign in the game to play, and one of the most imbalanced campaigns that you can play, because you start in that mess of a situation, but if you do manage it, you end up being ridiculously powerful. So that's not really, like a campaign where you just have a temporary downside early on is not what I consider difficult. Karl Franz on Legendary has a difficult campaign because he's in the middle of, well, everything, right? That can be a difficult campaign. Difficulty is not there just because of an economic downside. Actually, I would say this campaign would be substantially more difficult if you say starting Karak Azul. That would not be a joke, because you'd have Gorbat, you'd have Tretch, you'd have Queek, you'd have Skarsnik. That would make for a hell of a campaign as opposed to this. Maybe that would be a better way of handling things from my perspective, at the very least. But let me know what you guys think. I've just gone over the details of this campaign. Again, it does work. You can make it work very powerful, and it's actually more fun than I might lay it out to be. I just don't think the replayability factor is necessarily there. Like, I would rather play Malachi a lot more times than Belegar. Like, I'd rather play 10 Malachi campaigns, or 100 campaigns as Malachi, rather than a single Belegar campaign. It's that kind of ratio. I'd rather play 10 Forgrim campaigns, which I think Forgrim's campaign is more similar to what Belegar should be about. Because you fight Skarsnik, you fight Quake, you're doing that naturally, you're conquering Karak Peaks. You have to deal with the dimensions of that conflict, which again is what Belegar should be dealing with. from the beginning of his campaign, not just as an option. Because another factor to point out here is you can completely ignore it, deal with the pain, and then maybe Forgrim conquers Karakay Peaks, and then you confederate him guaranteed. Or maybe you just confederate Karakazul, take Karakay Peaks, and never have to fight either Quake or Skarsnik at any point in the campaign. So I think a point is missed over here with the way that CA designed this campaign. And I think this has been the case since Warhammer 1. And if there is any disappointment I've had with Thrones of Decay, it is specifically this. I think they did a great job with Skarsnik, with Omens of Destruction, to really elevate that campaign. I think Quake's campaign works really well, but out of the free Karakay Peaks campaigns, this is the least interesting. That's all I had to say. Stay tuned for more.